to the folks there. So I just wanted to give you a little background of where this project came from. So last year was the 50th anniversary of the Clean Water Act. And for lawyers like me, that's super exciting. For an ordinary person, most people are like, okay, great. I remember something about a river on fire. But what we wanted to do is thinking about the legacy of these laws, but that the power of the Clean Water Act really came from allowing third parties. It's called citizen suits, but it doesn't actually mean citizen in the typical way. But when the government's not doing its job and you're suffering pollution, you can step into the role of the government and enforce the law and protect your community. And thinking about that, we wanted to take this sort of wonky legal structure. And I know this is a lawyer talking about de-wonkifying legal structures, and think about the people who are experiencing pollution right at home. Their home is flooding every time there's a big storm. They get sewage backing up into their house. There's some icky sheen on the creek running through their backyard. They see a bunch of dead fish in the stream. The kids are playing and they get infections. All of these things, these people don't need to be experts in the law or the Clean Water Act in order to take control and have a voice in the process. And so that's where this project came from. And we're going to tell you a little bit about it. It is on the web to make it accessible. We've got some handouts if anyone didn't get one. I have lots more. And I think are going to leave a lot of time for questions. Is the plan? So Alex.
All right, everybody. Nice to see a full room. I'm Alex Villazon from Waterkeepers, Chesapeake, legal fellow. And like Betsy was saying, with the Clean Water Act Playbook, the aim is really to make sure that, I guess, really so it could be very accessible to a lot of folks, because a lot of the times the only avenues they have to really report pollution tend to be administrative processes that they aren't very familiar with, or frankly just don't have time. I mean, folks are working 9 to 5, they don't have time to just, for paycheck to paycheck, they can't really just go out of their way and participate in a lot of processes. So we feel as if having a website will really help. It's a much more accessible way of educating and really just trying to have the community be more engaged as well.
Oh, okay, sorry. We went back and forth about who's presenting which bit. So as I was saying, we were trying to think about what are the issues that people face in pollution? Where do these laws really come in to help local communities? And all pollution is local, right? It doesn't matter if this is something that's going on globally. What matters to me, probably to most of you, is what's happening right where I live. And so we tried to think about how to connect to where people live. We wanted to think about how to translate this tremendously successful law or group of laws, the Clean Water Act, that's then administered through the states, through state programs, and then often contracted out to local governments. And like you look at it and think, what? How am I ever going to figure out what's going on here? And so trying to think about what are those local triggers? What do you look for if you're having a problem and want to be able to resolve it yourself? And those are the kinds of resources we focused on. And that the takeaway of 50 years of the Clean Water Act is states need to do more. We've seen that recently, for those of you who do go on the wonky side, with the Supreme Court going through and ripping up the definition of waters of the United States, meaning the Clean Water Act doesn't apply in ways it used to. You know what you can do to fix it? Have strong state laws. So there's sort of the stacking of things, and local laws can also do the same kind of stuff. Grab that. So we're going to show you an example of one of the stories, which is really how we approach this, that people relate to situations, to things they know. And so we have a series of stories, both written and videos on the website, so people can understand that others have run into that same problem they have. And while it might take a long time, actually been able to solve it.
Yeah, so after hearing the why, here's pretty much the how. Trying to make it as easy to navigate as possible is the homepage, emphasizing the goal behind this, which is really the health of the community, everyone around it, whether it's water you drink, swim in, or if you're fishing for sustenance. And we're really trying to, as Betsy's saying, because of the Clean Water Act almost basically being gutted, we're really trying to push communities in order to, so they can further pressure their states to take action, given the lack of enforcement.
And this, what do I see? Who do I report to? What do I say? Kind of follows through in the structure of the website, just to kind of give you that practical, where do I start? We wanted to give people those resources so they felt like they could get started on dealing with the problem, understanding what's happening and where to move forward. Sorry, I keep putting this thing down. Oh, well, it likes it better over there.
Right. Just a excerpt here about what if Superman isn't coming, pretty much to say we can't really just sit back and expect someone else to just, lead us, especially from frontline communities. There needs to be multiple leaders, or just ways for them to be enabled to be leaders as well.
That's it. She wrote a book that's called that. If you want to do some reading, it's really good about what if Superman isn't coming? How can we do it on our own?
And here are some of the real world stories that Betsy was talking about.
This just breaking news on this one. You all might have seen that this was just resolved in a settlement on the back river of Patapsco wastewater treatment plants with the Maryland Attorney General's Office, Maryland Department of the Environment, Blue Water Baltimore, and the Baltimore Harbor Waterkeeper. So that's going to be fixed. And we're going to play coal ash for you, right?
That's right.
One of the people in this video is also here with us. So not.
My name is Dean Ajax. I'm the Potomac Riverkeeper. I work for Potomac Riverkeeper Network. As Riverkeepers, our job first and foremost is to protect the river. And when you're dealing with an issue like coal ash, or pretty much any issue, your job is to go out there and investigate what's happening. Back in 2015, the Indian Power was proposing to landfill or leave all this toxic coal ash, 4.5 million tons, on the banks of Quantico Creek and Potomac River, right near adjacent properties. And Potomac Riverkeeper Network had real concerns about all the toxic metals that are leaching out of these ash ponds because it's an unlined pit. All these metals, or at least a lot of them in there, obviously are carcinogenic, can cause serious health issues, neurological disruptions, birth defects for children. I think at the end of the day, it's really important for communities to recognize that a lot of these utilities are going to be moving forward to close these ash ponds because it is a federal requirement. But that doesn't mean they're going to do it the right way. It doesn't mean the state agencies are going to do the right thing on behalf of communities. And this is what we found in North Carolina and certainly in Virginia, is that we had to force the issue. We had to prove that there was off-site contamination occurring. We had to show that there was drinking well contamination. We had to show that this was a flawed plan, that there's better solutions for corrective action, like recycling or putting the stuff in dry line storage rather than leave it in these unlined pits that leach indefinitely to our rivers and waterways.
We would always have trees, and your parents would be up under the trees, kids could swim. was just great. You could fish, you could swim, crab. It was so beautiful. The waterway is still beautiful, it's just contaminated. It's just dirty. My name is Hilda Barr, and I live in this community which has been so affected by the coal ash at Possum Point for many years. The wells are contaminated. Dominion Power has agreed that they know that after doing well testing that they are now bringing in water to 6 or 7 families on this road every week. I feel very upset and frustrated for my neighbors to have to go through what they're going through right now.
When we first got involved, we were going to sue Dominion Power over toxic discharges to the Potomac River. At the end of the day, we ended up getting legislation passed requiring Dominion to clean up 28 million tons of coal ash, not just at Possum Point, but around the state. And a critical piece of that was engaging communities that were harmed or impacted by coal ash.
Clean drinking water and clean rivers are a public right, not a privilege to be granted by Dominion or by DEQ to the public.
It's poison. Call it what it is. These people keep unexpected. We will do what is our home.
Hearing from people, it tends to put a human face to the story. Engaging people in clean water issues has always been at least a very important part of the work that I do as Riverkeeper, because I can't be the lone voice on this. We need more voices on clean water. And I think that was critical to our success in forcing Dominion to clean up 28 million tons of toxic coal ash.
Dominion coal ash is polluting our groundwater, polluting our people's wells, and polluting our rivers and streams.
I suspect people in a lot of ways feel like they don't have any power. And it can be challenging for sure, but I think it's important to realize that, the federal coal ash rules do require corrective action measures. And then the Clean Water Act very clearly, you cannot be discharging toxic heavy metals into our public waterways. And so there's hooks there for people and communities. And that's the great thing about the Clean Water Act, is that it gives citizens standing for the water body that they live on. I think it's important for at least communities to recognize that they have the law and the science is on their side. It's just that they have to somehow figure out a way to leverage the legal support and the technical expertise to help. But there are ways that you can force these multi-billion-dollar corporations to do better.
We can make a difference in numbers if we can band together and fight for a cause. There's no cause on earth more worth fighting for than water.
So on here, we also have other stories like this, but in different situations. We have the Lower Susquehanna Riverkeeper, Ted Evgenitis, talking about his fight on coal ash too. We got it all over. But we wanted to break this up into the various areas where we were hearing from communities the most that they had problems. You could do it. Yeah.
Pretty much, and like what Betsy said, we really want to bring the center on the impacted communities, bringing all the local priorities coming from them, not just us or other organizations walking in and getting their bird's eye view of it and then thinking that's the solution or whatever they have as a solution. Also on climate change imperatives, looking at data, not treating science like an opinion, very, very important. Looking at the increased intensity and duration of rainfall as well going on. A lot of course, like Frontline Communities aren't well equipped to handle this. And like was mentioned earlier, coordinating Clean Water Act tools, not only federal law, but also coordinating on state level and local, making sure that communities know how to, or how these different levels of law intersect and can be used as a strategy. And also the power and wisdom of the network that Waterkeepers have, very, very strong. And they also, working together with communities, Waterkeepers can definitely hear from them and know how to best address the issues they're facing.
Yeah, you did it this time.
Oh,
All right, so who wants to talk about boring laws? So, did you want to do this? You want to do this? Okay. I've done this presentation before, it's easy for me to do anyway. But these are the super basic points that you would want to know about the Clean Water Act. And we're looking at all of you as kind of the conduit, the connector between maybe a nonprofit law firm or Waterkeeper or a resource like that that's going to help someone to use these tools. But you can be the connector by showing folks, your neighbors, anyone else, about this tool. They can use it. Hopefully it will help them solve problems and feel like they have a community that's going to fight with them. So basics of the Clean Water Act: most pollution, what you've heard, point source pollution, where there's, you know, kind of literally a pipe going into the waterway, you have to have a permit. There is a thought in the world that just putting pollution in the water is illegal. That is not in fact true. You get a discharge permit, and then exceeding your permit limits is what is illegal. There are also water quality standards. So those are based on uses of a waterway. For example, primary contact, which would be something like swimming, is going to have more restrictive standards than secondary contact, which would allow something like kayaking, fishing, but fishing is a little weird in a number of areas. And then, as I mentioned at the get-go of this, and why we got so excited about it with the 50th anniversary, citizen suits. And we call it that because that's what it says in the law. Like I said, you don't have to be a citizen. You just have to be an impacted person to be able to take the law into your own hands and enforce. And that was pretty revolutionary at the time. The Clean Air Act also has that, which was passed just a couple of years before. This is actually the Blue Water Baltimore team right there, who are doing a bunch of monitoring, but who just celebrated the big success for the back river. As I was just saying, every single person can enforce the law. And we get a lot of pushback when talking about this with regulators and legislators of, well, isn't that the job of government? It is when they do it, but they don't always do it. And that is the basic understanding of the Clean Water Act, that for any variety of reasons, government will fail to enforce the law sometimes, perhaps a lot. But whether it's political reasons, whether it's financial, whether insufficient staffing, they're just not going to see everything that people in the community can see. And that's where this really changed and gave us that huge right that changed the toxic legacy of just using our rivers as a dumping ground. And they're getting better, right? You're going to hear people like me and advocates always complaining about more pollution and more sources. But the fact of the matter is that there's been massive improvement. Same time, we also have new chemicals, new problems, and more people. So while the water quality is getting better, we have all of these additional burdens on it as well. And just, you know, plug for the advocates of the world here. 25% of the enforcement actions in the last decade, perhaps even longer, were brought by Waterkeeper organizations across the country. And we're all pretty little. Mine is one of the bigger ones in this area. We have a staff of 11. Waterkeepers Chesapeake has a staff of 5. and they're the conduit of all of the different water keepers in the area. A couple of them are one person. So NPDS, NIPDs, you hear people call it, you don't need to remember any of that, but that is the system for the discharge permits. And it's based on not everything you can do to keep the pollution out, but the best practicable technology. So it's a technology-based standard, meaning that it should get better over time. This, again, does not always happen. But that is, it's meant to drive innovation and effectiveness in removing pollution and pollutants. There is also sort of a background of you can't, one permit when reissued cannot be less stringent than the previous one, though that gets danced around a lot too. And the water quality standards are, that's for the uses. Then you set the standard of what would be supportive of that use, right? You got to set the bacteria standards so that it protects people at whatever contact level you're at, whether it's swimming, obviously more stringent, or kayaking. I can tell you, I definitely get water in my mouth when I kayak. Probably many of us do, but theoretically, you're not supposed to be getting water in your mouth. So those are the things that we use to kind of drive the innovation and those technology-based limits. I think this is.
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
good. So speaking of, so pretty much the website also, I'm just gonna pull it up right now, shows a lot of different resources and legal technical assistance. So where to find help and report pollution. See here, there are links to the Waterkeepers Chesapeake website, as well as Waterkeeper Alliance's website and River Network's Who Protects Water Map, in order to help folks find out really who to reach out to and report things they're seeing, or pollution and other things in their community, as well as links to legal clinics and just different equity, justice, and climate resources. And it's definitely worth noting that these every page on this website is can translate into Spanish as well, so even reaching even larger audience as well. I double checked it.
Yes.
Google is kind of wonky sometimes. Yeah. And even cooler, actually, down here, yeah, you can see this page is PDF. I think it should be on the bottom of each page on the website. So that's incredibly helpful if you want to print out handouts or whatever it may be.
Yeah, I know that, like, if I tried to ask my mother to look at this, she'd say, what? So, you know, if you're trying to get this information to somebody who either has bad internet service, which we have a lot in these areas, but also someone like my mother who is not going to go and look at a website, you can just print it and share the information.
This shot, right?
Are you going back to the presentation? I don't know why I lost its place there.
Yeah.
You should be around like slide 10-ish, 10, 12. Oh, yeah.
All right. So tools like the Clean Water Act Playbook, we feel like will help lay the bedrock for the next 50 years. Since last year, as Betsy was saying, was the 50th year anniversary of the Clean Water Act. Of course, a lot of it, given the current climate crisis and the history of environmental injustice and racism, the next 50 years are definitely more important, if not just as important. And really, a lot of it's based on planning and making sure, like planning for climate impacts for waterways to these communities, making sure that we're demanding corporate accountability for all the pollution that they're causing as well. And really pushing for strong enforcement of these laws on all levels. And investment in definitely healthier waterways, ecosystems, stormwater infrastructure, and local economies.
And we had hoped to have different times in which we were celebrating the 50th anniversary. But, you know, sort of in the recently COVID area, we didn't get to have as much engagement and involvement. But this is, you know, I'm thinking about like my niece and nephew. This is for them to be writing the plan for the future. This is what we think needs to be fixed. But I think the most important thing that we've learned is to listen and let the community voices dictate the agenda and not have that be, as much as I love them for all the great things they do, but a bunch of big nonprofits saying this is what's best for everybody. It matters at the local level differently for every single neighborhood, community, state, and those people should be setting the agenda, and we should be listening to them.
All right.
And just to the point of how we were hoping to get this more out there, we had planned to do trainings and a lot of those things that were sort of waylaid based on COVID and funding and a lot of other stuff. But that's why we're really pushing it out now, even though it's after the 50th anniversary, because I still think that this can be really helpful in connecting people and helping them to realize that you don't have to be an expert in the law. You just have to know that you have a problem and there are places and resources there that are going to help you. And that's really the purpose of this, is to help people get on that pathway. And even if, you know, the Waterkeeper or the legal nonprofit can't help you on everything. I actually had a situation myself recently with a community fighting a lithium ion battery storage facility right next to a daycare center. Not my issue, not my issue. But they were really frustrated, and I just gave them some basic tools of how to speak to the companies, Pepco, how to get in touch with the right people, the right regulators, and gave them some resources on how to write letters. And they did it. They beat it. They got it moved. And so, you know, that's all we need a little bit. Sometimes just that helping hand to let people be their own superheroes. So, like I said, we're going to leave a lot of time for questions, because this is something that all of you can access and look through on your own time, listen to the additional, watch to the additional videos, read some of the stories, post your own. There's an opportunity to do that as well. So, questions?
I mean, this might be a bigger question, but I'm interested in your thought behind this. You know, people have rights, and companies we know have earned the right to be identified like as an individual, like, so they have individual rights. How can we do that for water? Like a river having that classification as an individual, and there's science backing up that it's, you know, it's not this just, it's like a living organism. So
Yes.
like, would that then put more pressure for even these laws to be enforced?
Yes. So there are some efforts like that, often referred to as rights of nature. But there are some laws that are similar to that. Pennsylvania has one. It's not used as stringently as some of us would like, but it is protected in the Constitution. And that, I personally would love to see that in every state. And then where I live, it doesn't even have representation, the District of Columbia. But you're right. I mean, the science is there. We know this. The one thing none of us can live without: water, right? I mean, this is like space exploration. What are they looking for that would support signs of life? Water. Why is this so hard to get this message through? And sorry, you might have triggered a rant. But
yeah, I like, how can we activate and get, like, is that what it takes, like a grassroots movement then to push and say to our local congressman, like, this is, we want this for our river or our local?
yes, You can do it at the local government level too. A lot of times banning fracking in Maryland, we followed what was done in New York, but it was local government ordinances. Each local government was banning fracking. And we did the same thing in Maryland, got a bunch of local governments to ban it. At that point, the governor saw the writing in the wall and banned it in the state. So that, like, again, these things are local. So if you think like, oh, well, how are we gonna affect state law or federal law? Start where you live. And where do you live?
I'm right outside the district. I just actually moved closer to Annapolis, so.
Okay,
Yeah.
so Maryland, right?
Yep.
So Maryland's got some receptivity, right?
Yeah.
New administration, putting environmental justice as a huge priority. Hold them to it, right? Make them see what's going on in your community that's a problem and why it's a problem. Just don't be afraid to lift up your voice, your neighbors, your mothers, your cousins, whatever, about these issues, because I think that, well, I know the water is ours, belongs to all of us equally. And we have allowed some people to have superior rights that supersede all of ours. And that's just wrong. So I think those sorts of conversations are really great for people to be having, and have some people over and talk about it.
And I'm sorry to make you repeat yourself, but you said that would be like a right of nature. Like if we were, like, I work with faith communities, right? So if like a whole congregation of 200 to 500 people agreeing like, yeah, we want to sign on to this, that would be called a right of nature.
Honestly, you could call it whatever you want. Whatever I would call it, whatever is going to be the best politically for you. But people have called these, kind of like green amendments or green rights or rights of nature, rights of water. It all goes back to public trust doctrine, which probably nobody here wants to talk about, but again, lawyers. Yeah, there's a lawyer back there. So, but that is the basis of all of this, that these resources, our water, our air, our land, are held in trust for the public's use and not for a few greedy corporations to pollute. Not that I have opinions on.
This is kind of more like your personal stance, but I'm a junior in college and I took AP Gov when I was in high school, and we didn't learn anything about any environmental policy at all. Like, how do you think that is impacting like the people that you're working with and like what they know about the government? Because we learn about local government, but we don't learn anything about environmental policy, period.
Yeah, I think you're identifying, it's not the only one, right? But I think there's some pretty big scale problems with the educational system. Again, outside of my area, so I'm not going to opine on that too much. But we have been putting the environment back here in terms of priorities. And that is now raising its head and saying, you have been doing this for too long. Mother Nature is out there saying, come on, look at what you've done, right? The increasing rain intensity, flooding, storms, catastrophic storms. We have hundreds of thousands of people dying through these environmental catastrophes going on now. And it's showing that we can't ignore this any longer. Infrastructure is something that we've ignored in this country for so long. And what has it resulted in, right? Bridges collapsing, just dams bursting and flooding entire communities. When lawyer in the back there, when he and I were working together on a bill a few years ago related to how about we update the data on rainfall. Virtually no states have done this. They are using the same data on rainfall to base their technology standards on from 1972 when the Clean Water Act was enacted. And so we just required them by law in Maryland to update this every 5 years using actual science. That was revolutionary. We were giving presentations, nationally to other groups on how to do this. We have just ignored it too long. I think that younger generations coming up are learning a lot more and know more. And hopefully they can really step forward and show us the way, because we have left them with an effed up environment for sure. And that's not fair. So I think, again, raise your voice, complain. Can't hurt. Might make it better.
How are you reaching these frontline groups? Are they kind of reaching out to you? Are you letting them know you're there? How are you communicating with these different communities?
So that's the thing that was not as we had hoped. Through a lot of things kind of outside our control. And so that's why we're doing more of this. We recognize that like Waterkeepers Chesapeake, 5 people, right? You know, you can't be everywhere. But trying to give presentations, we have partnered with like Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake to do some presentations for the congregation. Would be happy to do that because we can't necessarily be the ones who are getting it everywhere, but all of you can. And so that's what we're hoping for, is just to just keep sharing and making this as accessible as possible.
Do you have any priority regions in mind for creating those partnerships?
I mean, obviously the most overburdened communities need it the most. They're often the hardest to reach because of all of the reasons that we call them overburdened communities, that they've been left out of the process. They're frustrated, probably pissed off, and really busy, because the environment is not the only way in which they're overburdened. It's, you know, lack of all these other resources. So just trying to share and also let people know you don't have to do it all yourself, right? And that we can help. But, you know, we want to make sure that it's at the needs and wishes of those communities. But the Maryland EJ screen tool, I like a lot. It has some parameters in it that aren't in EPA EJ screen, but for other states, EPA EJ screen is a really great way to identify communities. You can click around there and see everything about their percentage risk of death from a variety of things. The demographics of the area, the pollution sources, how close they are to Superfund sites, wastewater treatment plants. So whatever you're flooding, whatever you want to look at, you can use these tools to help you understand those community needs. So that, like, if I was talking to a community who had a whole lot of air issues, I would suggest maybe getting somebody in there who can talk about air things in addition to the water, because you're always going to have both. You know, but just trying to personalize those things a little bit so they go to what they're feeling and not make it like, oh, you should care about the environment. No, this is not what we're trying to say. We're saying that these things may be harming you and your family. Here's what you can do to speak up and stop it. So just trying to make it as easy as possible. And we are open to feedback on how to do that, how to get the message out, working with anyone on that as well. Like I said, you know, lawyers from the get-go. So, so I recognize that I might not be the most traditional conduit for community relations, but I mostly work with non-lawyers, so I've learned to talk not so much like a lawyer.
So the 2025 TMDL is coming up. Do you anticipate, well, I mean, I'm from Pennsylvania, so like, you know, we're not going to get there. Are people gearing up for, you know, using that as a tool to, you know, a lack of enforcement of that TMDL to gain consequences? And do you have any other kind of insight on how that might change things?
Yeah, excellent question. Is it wrong to just say, I told you so, again and again? But if you have as you know, voluntary measures, you will get some of the population. You will never get all of it. And here, especially Pennsylvania, really needed all. Pennsylvania is so far behind in large part, not because they weren't doing anything and they weren't trying, but because it's all non-point source, which does not have much of anything in terms of the laws like the Clean Water Act enforcing it. So you have to convince people one by one to do it, which is really hard. But what we've been trying to do is also convince them, people way upstream, that they should care about a point in the deep channel of the bay. Why would they? Right? We need to be talking to them about their backyard, where they live, their community. And all of our measures need to be adjusted to that, to looking at the shallow water creeks and streams, to actual, I mean, we learned, not to get too wonkified here, but the Caesar report, some of you have probably heard it, but this is the report that basically was saying what we're doing isn't working. But it didn't say, and so give up. We have made progress. We're just not focusing in the way that's going to be the most effective, both at making progress and keeping people engaged. I've had circumstances, this was on the enforcement side, but if you go on industrial stormwater sites, we did an enforcement campaign. And when we started visiting a number of different little facilities, they started turning each other in, which was really funny to me. They're like, well, why are you bugging us? They're so much worse. They're doing this, and tell me more. But that viewpoint is important, right? If you individually are being held to a high standard, but there are all these others who are not, you're going to lose a lot of incentive to do it. And we've had just terrible enforcement of the laws, just terrible, across all of the Bay States. And so why are we telling people in the agricultural community that you have to do all of this work, spend this money, the cleanup of the Chesapeake Bay that you don't get any use of because it's not in your state, is on your back? But all these wastewater treatment plants, they can just put millions of gallons of untreated sewage into the waterways, and that's okay. That's never going to work. We're going to keep this cycle going again and again and again. So that was probably a lot of things in there, but we keep it local and keep it there. Right? That would be what I'd have to say about the 2025 deadline and the Caesar report is, unless we start to address it that way, it's not going to work. And there's also a big equity issue with the investment of money in this, that the most effective basins has resulted in money going to primarily white, at least middle class areas, because it's too expensive to go in and fix problems in more urban areas. Admittedly, it does cost more, but that doesn't make it right. This is everybody's taxpayer dollars. They shouldn't just be going to some communities. They should be going to all. So that's my, was that helpful at all?
Oh, for sure. But I guess one little, if I could add on, sorry.
Yeah.
But like from a regulatory perspective, from like a Clean Water Act perspective, is that TMDL a standard that we as citizens could hold to the EPA to? If you know, okay, it's 2025, we have a different presidential administration, say, and there are different priorities. You know, would that be a mechanism that we could use?
The basis of it was that it was going to become enforceable through the permits. And I think that's where we failed, is that if we actually put those standards in there for, I'm going to get the language a little bit wrong, but the Maryland animal feeding operation permit, for example, just assumes that the TMDL is incorporated. For construction and stormwater, Jesse, you probably know this right off the top of your head. What did they say? That if you use innovative erosion sediment control designs, that means you have met the TMDL, despite the fact that you're using 50-year-old rainfall data.
They're not innovative, they're just basic regular silt fences and stuff. So yeah, there's a presumption of compliance, whether that's factually true or not.
Yeah, it was a dropping the ball on using those hooks that we had to enforce. And so the overall, some of the voluntary, like the agreements, the Bay agreements, I don't know if they're enforceable. And I think EPA is maybe a little afraid to push that in the courts, but there's a whole lot that is. And that's why the more local the more state focused, we can have a much bigger influence. Yeah, I'm sorry. I get
You're
excited about
the
this stuff and I
expert,
just
you're the
realized I'm
expert.
talking all, him and then.
I was gonna ask, is this something like that can be applied to the Clean Air Act as well? Or is it specific to the Clean Water Act? In terms of like having citizens be able to enforce that?
I think it would be sort of analogous, but the Clean Air Act just works a little bit differently. For just the fact of the mediums are so different. The Clean Air Act actually is a little more stringent as well. So you can get better enforcement there. And there's been a lot of focus on that. Car inspections, right? Like that's something that literally every person has to do. I think we all have to do it on a yearly basis. We don't have that really for anything that's similar to that for water. So I think it could be helpful, but not, directly applicable.
Yeah, so I was wondering, you say that a lot of times it's better to work through the states, but I was wondering, how does it work in different states with different political landscapes? Like, I feel like Maryland is probably one of the states that's the most receptive to this kind of legislation in the country, but how does that work in a state with different priorities?
Yeah, I mean, I have the fortune or misfortune of currently working in Maryland, Virginia, Pennsylvania, only a little Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and the District of Columbia. And I'm the policy person, small organizations. I used to work in Georgia and pushed policy, and I was in Atlanta. I know I was in my little, progressive bubble there, but we pushed water laws effectively all the time. And it has become so politicized. Clean water is important to everyone. And I don't know how to get past that right now. When you have segments of society that don't believe in science, it was okay. Can you go somewhere else? Because I don't know how to work with that. I'm really hoping again for solutions from the younger people who've maybe come up seeing this weird, crazy, divided, politicized environment that you need clean water just as much as I do. And so I think we're going to have to develop new tools for how to force that. And if appealing to people doesn't work, sue the bastards.
I'm not a lawyer, so please correct me if I get any of this wrong, but I remember after the second Supreme Court decision, which weakened the Clean Water Act, Chesapeake Legal Alliance did a webinar where they actually talked about how that would impact Chesapeake states. And I think all of the states have some analogous state law to the Clean Water Act. In fact, Pennsylvania surprisingly has one of the stronger ones. So like there is like and again, please, if there's anything that, but I think there is like state mechanisms in addition to the federal law.
Yes, and that's a really important point, and it gave me an opportunity to plug something. Virginia has pretty much the same state definition of waters of the state of Virginia that was guided by the federal law. Maryland does as well, Pennsylvania, West Virginia doesn't. Sorry, West Virginia folks and West Virginia. We need to do more there. District of Columbia doesn't even have permitting rights. So in Maryland, we are trying to move things forward, and we're going to be, a bunch of us are working on a right at state law level to enforce the Maryland state water law. So a state citizen suit provision. I'm sure it's going to be wildly popular in the development and industrial communities, but we're working on it. We got bill sponsors. We'll see what happens. But those are, a baseline that can provide that protection even during these difficult times. They just don't always have things like enforcement capability. And as I was mentioning about, you know, the wastewater treatment plants, they blew away, just a couple of plants failing, blew away everything in the compliance of the state of Maryland with their TMDL plans. So under state law, we couldn't have taken any enforcement actions there, and the state obviously didn't. They joined after Blue Water Baltimore brought the lawsuit, but they didn't do it on their own. So that's the problem, is that they don't necessarily have those same rights to the courts or other things, but that can still protect the waters. They wouldn't be allowed to issue permits that are, example, you know, just unpermitted discharges under the state law. Is that helpful?
Yeah, no, thank you.
All right, last one, I promise. I'm just, because I try to wrap my head around this a lot of times too, because it just seems like this, what is this, like an endless circle, right? You're just going back and forth. Like, is there a lack of like environmental health and safety? Maybe I'm using the wrong term, like those like independent reporters, right? That like go to different businesses and are looking for violations, looking for, you know, health and safety issues. Is that like profession lacking? And you know, I feel like maybe more of those would be easier than to enforce these codes, and then they could report back to.
Yeah, you can tell I'm a little cynical, right? We've been dismantling our free press system in this country for a long time, and it's gone much more towards entertainment than factual investigations. Our newspapers are mostly owned by 3 or 4 big companies, and we have such a focus on short-term gains instead of the long-term. Corporate CEOs average tenure is about 2.5 years. So if in 2.5 years you have to show your performance in that corporation, it's maximize profits. You're not thinking about the long-term sustainability of the corporation. Same with newspapers. So we lost that. We've also had the highest level the EPA and states have been at in terms of funding for their state environmental programs was in the Reagan era. That was the highest level for this EPA as well. So we're working on that, a little bit of recognition, but there's a few ways to make sure laws don't move. Don't pass them or don't fund them. And that's what we have been doing. It's not like people who work in state agencies don't want to do their job. But when there's 2 people covering the entire state, they cannot possibly do it. So I don't think it's that they're not trying. It's they've been given an unbearable task that they can't possibly do. They are set up for failure, and we have to fix that. It's priorities in this country, which I think we could all rant about for a long time. But our health and safety, our community, our education, our free press, I mean, they're all pieces going in that same direction, which is community empowerment. And when communities lose those tools, we're subject to a lot of what we're seeing right now.
And so this is the greatest mechanism, in your opinion, to move that forward, because it's.
I mean, community efforts are always how we have changed things in this country, from the grassroots efforts. I mean, from civil rights, which we're still fighting, but every single thing, it comes down to active grassroots engagement, stepping up and speaking truth to power. And so we're trying to push that's where we have to go with clean water protection. Thank you. And I think we're kind of at time.
Yeah. Maybe we have 30 more seconds. There was a question that just came in on Zoom that I think is kind of fun to end the whole forum presentation things on. So specifically for Betsy, has anyone created commercials for prime time to educate the public on non-point source pollution in recent years?
No, I have seen a number of groups do it, and you can find them on YouTube, and there are some fantastic ones. There's one with rubber duckies. It makes it really fun. But lots of them, we just haven't gotten that boost yet. But thank you for that question. This person, I like the way you're thinking.
And with
So-
that, thank you so much. Let's give it. Remember, fill your evaluation. Betsy there's gonna exchange raffle tickets for those. Those will be tonight in the big lodge
Does
underneath the
anyone
dining hall.
need an evaluation form?
Is it like